coming up on Theater Talk.
You know what they always ask? When did you first hear you were nominated for a Tony? Ben, when did you first hear that James Franco called you a little bitch?
Well, I was coming back on the train from my house in the country. I was coming back to the city to see something, and I kept getting emails from members of the office saying, I loved that review. James Franco's a horrible person. I thought, well, that's a bit harsh. I mean, what?
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskin.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
So, Michael, the season is over. How did it go?
Well, it's time to assess it, and we have brought the guns of Navarone in today. The critical guns of Navarone. The big three. People shudder what these people say about the Broadway shows. They live and die on the words of our friends Peter Marks from the Washington Post, Ben Brantley of the New York Times, and Terry Teachout of the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to Theater Talk.
I'm trying to imagine all these shuddering people.
well, before we get there, we must address a couple of issues. One, Ben's good friend James Franco, after poor little James Franco read a not terribly flattering review of Mice and Men on Broadway now. Ben's
it
review.
wasn't damning, though. It was actually rather mild-mannered.
I thought you were. Yeah, I thought you gave the guy a fair shake.
You should have waited a couple of days for mine.
So Franco tweets. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he called you a little bitch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he said the theater world hates you and you're a little bitch.
Yes.
But that only was up for a little while because he didn't have the guts to keep it up all the time. I assume you read it.
I did.
And what? You know what they always ask? When did you first hear you were nominated for a Tony? Ben, when did you first hear that James Franco called you a little bitch?
Well, I was coming back on the train from my house in the country. I was coming back to the city to see something, and I kept getting emails from members of the office saying, I loved that review. James Franco's a horrible person. I thought, well, that's a bit harsh. I mean, what is this based on? And then I actually got a call from the Observer saying, do you want to comment on it? And so then I realized I had to look it up. So yes, and I answered, and I said, you know, I think it's kind of fun when this happens. It lends a certain sort of all about Eve glamour that doesn't exist too much anymore. And he took it down, and God, the roses he sent me, I've got to tell you, were just... But no, I mean, this happens periodically. Josh Brolin did it.
Yeah, what did Josh Brolin do?
Josh Brolin said, I hate that. I don't think I can say it on this television show.
Right, I hate that.
But then when I answered him in your paper, in the New York Post, he sent me an email saying, loved your comments, no harm, no foul, and now we're e-friends. Quentin Tarantino and I have never reconciled, and Alec Baldwin and I have never reconciled.
Right, Quentin Tarantino would wait until dark, didn't
Yes.
you kill him in that one? Yeah. And what was Alec Baldwin in?
Orphans last
Orphans,
year,
right,
yeah.
right.
He took out a column in the Huffington Post.
You know, I thought that James Franco was better than you did, but the sense of entitlement that comes from calling you a little bitch, had I been a Tony nominator, if I'd been considering him, which I wouldn't have been, I would have then just not been able to take him seriously because he's just being a bad sport and a spoiled
well, and
brat.
What does he know about the theater world?
But it wasn't.
Well, no,
But it wasn't. I said it wasn't a bad performance. He didn't disgrace
No, he
himself. I
didn't.
just said it was a very tight,
But
internalized
these people are
performance.
surrounded by people
Right.
who tell them yes, yes, yes,
Yep.
1,000 times a day, and the first no freaks them out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an impulse. I mean, the fact that he pulled it down says to you that it was a knee-jerk response.
And then all those yes people came on him and said, oh, we got to pull this down. We got to take this down.
Well, that's it.
And the first thing the yes people tell them is, yes, you can make your stage debut on Broadway.
Right.
That's where it all goes downhill from there. Peter, have you ever gotten into a little tiff with somebody you've zinged in your years?
Well, years ago, I mean, I reviewed Hedwig in all its manifestations very early on, and one of the people who played her, was Ali Sheedy.
Oh, yes.
And after Michael Cerveris and John Cameron Mitchell played it, she played it, and I said, in similarly kind of, soft terms, she's all wrong.
Yeah.
And she declared in, I think, the pages of your paper, I hate Peter Marks. I mean, that was like her response. I mean, it was a public declaration, not to me personally.
Terry, has anyone come after you?
Tony Kushner.
Oh, yeah.
What happened there? What happened there?
What did he call me? A wing nut.
A right wing nut.
No, not left wing.
Right wing nut, yeah.
I like just wingnut.
Yeah. That's actually
Wing nut
a
is
great
perfectly
phrase.
fine. You just take the high road and you don't respond, or do you respond to anyone who...
Why what's to respond?
I mean, I will.
I mean, I got to write the review.
Right.
He gets to say.
Yeah, I think that's
Right.
Oh,
That's my take.
You were going to say you.
No, I mean, if a newspaper calls me, I will say yes, but it's, you answer circumspectly. And as I pointed out with both, all of them, I usually like their work. I just didn't happen to in this instance.
Well, one of the interesting parts of the response is that people think we're going to retaliate. That's the impression, that if you say something about a critic, then it's going to come back to haunt you. And the truth is, we've had our say. It's really hard to
Yeah, I think I'm always fair, but if anything, I'm going to lean over in the other direction, not to look like I'm,
beating up on them.
wanting to do the job on somebody.
My favorite was a letter from a playwright, whom I suppose I won't name, but rather eminent playwright, who ended by saying, and it was just a screed, and then ended by saying, I know I have the consolation that God will judge you someday. I choose to judge you and condemn you now.
Oh my God, that's good. All right, so let's get to some of these shows. Just how bad was James Franco in Of Mice and Men, Ben?
He wasn't terrible. I mean, for me at least, it was an inert production. There wasn't a whole lot of momentum. I didn't feel a chemistry between the two guys,
Chris O'Dowd,
particularly,
right, yeah.
which I thought was essential. And Chris O'Dowd, it was a perfectly lovely performance, but honestly, I don't think it's that hard to do that character.
No.
And whoever does it is going to get nominated, guaranteed.
Right.
The way the autistic guy from Orphans got nominated, it's just one of those parts.
The
One of
Rain
those-
Man.
those
Oscar,
the Rain Man role.
Oscar,
Yeah.
or
but
Tony.
he was very
whatever.
mannered with the hand, and
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
seemed a little over the top.
Strange hands. I never figured out what that was all
Well, that was the kind of delicacy of him. I think that was meant to show the sensitive side that would
Oh.
crush the rabbit. I mean, stroke the rabbit. before throttle it.
they seated us, I thought, very close
Right.
for that production.
Right.
The critics were up in the first several rows, and that was because James Franco was giving a performance to the front row, and that was about
It was a tiny performance. You
think that-
notice when, not spoiler alert, but when he shoots his best friend at the end, a single tear forms in his eye, but you had to be there.
I
on
was-
top of it.
Close
And
up.
I was, and I thought that was very sweet.
All right, let's get to some of the other shows on Broadway this season. One that I find it's an interesting play, but it left me a little unsettled. Casa Valentina, Harvey Fierstein's play about.
Okay,
It's about. Tell us what it's about.
Right. It's a play about a resort in the Catskills that catered to allegedly straight transvestites.
Right.
And it's a mess. It's 2 or 3 different plays sort of jammed together. It doesn't have an ending, but it's not dull.
Yeah.
He's dealt with something. It's an interesting subject. He can't bring it to fruition. But I'd really rather see a messy play that isn't dull than a
See,
beautifully
I
done play that
did
is.
find sections of it dull. I loved the first 20 minutes. I thought this is going to be magical when you have the different men seated at their vanities and there's this kind of wind chime music going on. And you're aware of the poetry of becoming a woman for these men. And there was something very touching about that. When it becomes talk about, McCarthyism and, when they're having the formal debate. Which is
Right, that was
effectively
when
what
my
happens.
eyes started to roll.
Exactly, that's when you start to glaze over a little bit.
But then he comes back after intermission and starts writing a play again.
Mayor Winningham's fabulous. By the way.
Yes,
sounds
as the woman married to the man.
right,
who was.
right.
She's so good.
Well, the discussion of it sounds almost like a metaphor or for the entire analogy for the entire season, which everything, one thing after another in terms of new musicals and new plays, just didn't feel complete. Or, I mean, over and over and over again.
Yeah, I don't like to say it was a lackluster season because there were very good things in it. But, as most people who are watching this show know, there are a whole lot of openings in the last month of the season. And I was looking at that list and saying, what am I excited about? What can I not wait to see? And that list wasn't so long.
Well, I have to say, the one thing that I was looking forward to, and in fact, I kind of promoted it a little prematurely.
A little, Michael.
Less Bullets Over Broadway, which thanks to you, Susan, because you went to see the press preview and you called me and you said they did 3 numbers, they were great.
They put the 3 fabulous numbers together, and it was a brilliant press performance.
I know. So what went wrong, Peter, with Woody Allen's Bullets Over Broadway?
Everything. Everything went wrong. It was, first of all, the music they chose. I mean, to patch together these, which from what I understand was mostly public domain material,
From the 20, yeah.
and make that the score for this show, and very little of it felt like it related to the material itself. Seemed very strange.
It was a staging in search of a score.
The jokes didn't land. It felt like they were not out of a Woody Allen film. They felt like they were out of like a Marx Brothers movie or
Well,
something.
that was the thing, yeah. I mean, that's what I began with. You don't do Woody Allen through a megaphone. I mean, he's sort of out of the side of your mouth, and suddenly you're going, "A hot dog, get it?"
And a hot dog, like a hung hot dog.
Yes, we have no bananas.
It was awfully shrill for me, and I was looking forward to it because I'd read in some column that it was supposed to be the one surefire show this season.
As I always say, my column is a snapshot of the passing scene, and the scene passes.
Well, I liked it more than Peter and Ben did, but for me, the score was the killer. It just wasn't there. And jukebox musicals are always potentially a problem, but this was an unusually lame attempt to put together an after-the-fact score.
I was surprised about that too, because if you watch any of Woody's movies, he has
The music's gorgeous.
he picks the great songs, and not the most obvious ones. Some sort of second-tier ones you may not have heard before that you love when you hear them.
Well, and he evokes, if not the exact sense of period in his movies, whether it's Midnight in Paris or Bullets Over Broadway set in the 20s, he at least gives you a sense of pastiche. I mean, a kind of longing, wistful pastiche of, gee, it must have been like this. I didn't get any of that in this.
Speaking of original scores, Peter, I thought were somewhat overly generous to If Then, which is the only original musical, not based on anything, tried out in Washington, and I thought you were encouraging of Brian Yorkie and Tom Kitt. But it came here and was not really embraced, not only by the critics, but also the Tony nominators turned their backs on this show, too.
Interestingly, but audiences have turned their fronts towards
please,
this
audiences,
show.
we don't know.
I thought it was a mess in Washington. And listen, there are very few opportunities in this business anymore to comment on a tryout musical out of town. And the responsibility of a critic out of town is to help them at some level fix what's wrong. And they worked on some of the things that were wrong and didn't work on some of the others. I basically said it's got moving elements in a structure that basically doesn't work.
And essentially, just give us for people who haven't seen it, what it's about.
It's two interwoven versions of the life of a 40-year-old woman who's come back to New York. One of them, the romantic part of her life, the other, the career part. And what I was thinking about with If Then, the problem really is, many women today live both sides of the story of If Then.
Right.
You don't make the choice of career or love. You have both. And so it's a little bit of an artificial construct, and I think they never could work their way out of it. That said, I think it's scandalous that If Then was not nominated for Best Musical over a string of Carole King songs, I don't care how nicely woven together, and a review.
Of After Midnight.
The Tony nominators just pick things that look commercially intact. We're not picking things, and as angry as Charles sounded and whiny,
Charles Isherwood,
in his little online diatribe about the lack of nominations for the realistic Joneses, he has a point, which is that there is no encouragement on Broadway for doing anything but the tried and true. And that's why you get, 5 musicals based on brand name movies. That's why we're in this dilemma.
Right.
Well,
I didn't much care for If Then.
Yes, why?
But it's a serious attempt to write a serious show. I mean, I didn't care for it because I didn't like it. I didn't think the score was that good. Conceptually, I thought it was also a mess. But they were trying to do something other than a commodity musical.
No,
I
and
give them great
and I
credit
think
for
we all
that.
gave them credit for that.
Yeah.
I mean, that said, for me, it was on a treadmill. Basically, every song was the same song. Shall I not? And then finally, at the end, they
That's
say, "Okay,
beautifully
and
done.
now you can
Beautifully
open it."
invoked.
Now you can open your voice, Adina, finally. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, she is one guaranteed commodity.
And it's
But
a
also,
wonderful performance.
I think it addresses an actual, even if not particularly well, it addresses topics that younger people in this culture actually think about.
And especially
Younger
the girls
people
who identified
with money, though.
Yeah.
I mean, look.
Well, what else? Who else goes to Broadway?
I hate
mean,
this
poor people go to
phrase.
Broadway?
Say that
I
again?
hate this phrase, but this is a musical about white people's problems. I mean,
she is an urban planner.
yeah. I mean, I don't see that as a compelling dilemma that I want to see played out on a stage. I really don't.
Ben, you were going to chime in there with the.
I think that's a narrow view to think it is just white people's problems. I think that's not.
Oh no! What I was
really-
going to say was that the girls who had fallen in love with her in Wicked are now of an age. I mean, they had
Exactly.
grown up with her, so they're going to go back and see, you know, the way people watch recurring actresses in Lifetime movies. It's, oh my gosh, now Patty Duke is the grandmother.
What relevance is addressed by A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder? I mean, let's be real here. I mean, in terms of trying to find things that actually have some relevance to an audience today.
None, but I don't think that relevance is per se something that you necessarily want or don't want to see in a show.
How about it just being
Gentleman's Guide
entertaining?
is a good show because it's entertaining and immensely clever.
Did you like it?
I liked it okay. I thought it was
Based on the.
right on Kind Hearts and Coronets,
Right, right.
essentially.
Can't say that it's based on Kind Hearts.
They have the
Boys.
same-
Officially, they have the
Right,
same
right.
source
But and it is still the same device.
Yeah.
You know, Alec Guinness in the film doing all the parts, and Jefferson Mays doing it here. I thought it was kind of second-rate, the whole thing. But having said that, I still think it was better than anything else that's nominated because it had a sustained point of view and followed it through all the way. It reminded me of a sort of regional Gilbert and Sullivan production, kind of. It had that charm. I expected it to be just effervescent, which it
Never
wasn't.
quite
No,
did, yeah.
no.
Yeah. You didn't like it at all, apparently, because it's not relevant?
No,
Murdering
we're
your
that's
relatives to get money?
That's what we're throwing out as the sort of the concern with if then. I'm just saying that where's anything that has anything connection to the world today in these nominated musicals? I thought it was mechanical. I thought it was technically sound. I couldn't find anything. It was unassailable that way. Did it delight me? I can't say that I can't say that I laughed once, maybe once at one of Jefferson Mays.
It kind of trickled along pleasantly. I didn't feel, oh God, I've got to get out of here. But I never, like Peter, I never went, I never felt
broke out of
transported
that.
by.
I take exception about your trashing of After Midnight, which is a show that I rather
I'm not
like.
trashing it. I'm just saying, is it the right category?
Well, but I mean,
for
I
it?
have no problem, Terry, with a review when done well. I mean, there's a history of the old-fashioned Broadway where shows are basically reviews of good songs and
I mean,
dances.
I didn't
But
see
are they
After Midnight
musicals?
because obviously there was a conflict for me. I had an Ellington book coming out.
Right,
but
of course, yeah, the Duke
A
Ellington,
good
right.
review is a thing of beauty and a joy forever.
Did you enjoy After Midnight?
I enjoyed it. Again, I didn't go over the moon for it. I mean, what looks actually strangely good to me now, but just simply by default, is beautiful.
Yes,
I
I agree. I agree.
Just because you got such a good central performance from her in that.
Jesse Mueller.
Jessie Mueller
As
is
Carol
the
King.
star
Yeah,
of the next
yeah,
generation.
yeah.
She, as soon as she gets to play herself or an identifiable
But in
character.
this, it wasn't just an imitative performance. I mean, I think it's so great when someone can do someone, a presence we're aware of, and evoke the voice without doing pure mimicry. I mean, this was something that transcended mimicry.
And Peter, what I liked about that performance is it's not a Broadway flashy performance. It's not Idina Menzel belting the big notes out. It's not Sutton Foster tap dancing her brains out. I thought Jessie Mueller was very, very subtle and moving as Carol.
Why do you think that worked and Janis Joplin didn't work? Why is that? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I mean, you saw both of them.
I didn't see Beautiful. I didn't see the Carol King.
Oh, why not? That's gonna. I think
doesn't
that's gonna.
interest me. I have to say.
I think that's gonna win the Tony Award. But I mean, I think that's an oversight, though, don't you? I mean, Beautiful is.
Yeah, I think it's worth seeing just for her.
I'll see it on the road.
Yeah.
Really?
Apparently-
Because I think Beautiful. I know that you guys were a little lukewarm to it. The book, it's a kind of second-rate book, but I thought it evoked that era of songwriting and that sort of thrill building.
There are moments that stay with me when I look back on it. There's that one where before she becomes a professional singer, where she's doing a demo tape, and she's just standing there, do you remember, sort of hitting the side?
Yeah.
And I thought, this is exactly how it must have been. I mean, this professional woman who doesn't really think of herself in these terms, who's been conditioned not to think of herself in those terms, just doing what she has to do to get the record sold.
But it is a vehicle for a great performance, and I don't want to diminish that because she is giving a great performance. But it's nothing more than that to me.
Yeah. Bridges of Madison County, in retrospect, looks better to me than other things. At least it had a very pretty score. And again, Kelly O'Hara, who's going to be overlooked once again,
Yep.
I thought was wonderful. I thought that was a really layered, touching performance.
How did you feel about Bridges? It's closing May
I thought the
18th.
score was fantastic. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was Jason Robert Brown's best work. I thought she was strong. I don't know that it was a Broadway musical. I'm not sure it had that. It's a very small story.
I don't
It
know
looked a
that
little lost.
It was
on
a
that.
Broadway musical only because they
Yeah,
thought
it
the
looked a
target
little
audience was
Broadway.
middle-aged
No,
women
I
who
mean,
liked the novel.
I mean, it looked a little lost on that stage.
It's a two-person show.
Yeah,
that
and
got
that's the
blown
thing.
up.
All the Our Town stuff around it, I thought didn't.
Well, hold on a second. I saw Raisin in the Sun last night, and I've seen that play a number of times, but I really sort of just admire the old-fashioned, well-made play.
That
It's not
did
So
come
do I.
Absolutely.
so
So
clearly
do I.
this time. I think
Totally.
that's true.
Totally.
And I liked that Denzel didn't give a barnstorming performance.
Yeah.
I liked that they all seemed to belong to the same family, all seemed to have been affected by the same economic elements that were dragging them down. There was a very sort of touching quality of fatigue to that. And I mean that without feeling like it was a draining theatrical
No,
experience.
no.
But I was quite moved by that.
Kenny Leon is an underrated director because he's not flashy, he doesn't do conceptual productions. It actually took me a few of his shows to realize, no, it's him, and he's really good.
And you admire the old-fashioned, well-made play?
Well, this one really brought it home for me.
Everything pays off.
Yeah.
It's so well
I even
done.
liked Denzel. I went in just
He's
a
too old
doubter.
for the part, but it doesn't
It
really...
didn't matter.
But it was like he was someone who had been aged by his
Yeah,
environment. It
well,
kind
the-
of made sense.
The exhaustion of this family made sense in that.
Well, and everybody in that cast was golden. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
I mean, right down to the smallest parts. And Stephen McKinley Henderson, one of our very best actors, who's on stage for what, 7 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, he's
And he
fabulous.
eats everybody's lunch while he's out there.
Oh, and what I think is on the same level in terms of a fully integrated revival with every performance sort of counting was Cripple of Inishmaan.
Yes.
I thought it was a beautiful production.
I haven't seen that, but you like that too?
Yeah, I was a doubter, a Daniel Radcliffe doubter. I'm ashamed to say, after seeing him twice on Broadway and not really liking him. And I thought this was in his wheelhouse. It was a lovely. He's grown up to be an actor.
He did the right thing, the thing that other actors mentioned earlier today. He decided, okay, I'm going to go at this as a craftsman. I'm going to try Equus, and then I'm going to try a musical, and then I'm going to do this. And now, look.
Yeah, you
he's
could actually
real.
see him learning how to become a stage actor in the
he's
shows that he's
absolutely
done it
real. And
publicly.
What's great about it is he is, even though he's playing the title role and he's playing someone who's set aside by physical disability, so he's obviously that, and he's talked about more than any other character in the play, and yet he's a member of the ensemble, truly a member of the ensemble. You feel they all inhabit the same universe.
Same with Denzel Washington too.
Exactly. I think
Not-
that's
At
true,
the
yeah.
preview of Inishmaan that I saw, when he made his entrance, there was like a 5 or 6 second delay before it hit the audience that was him.
That was him.
What a tribute to somebody who's giving
Yeah,
a
it's a good
serious
sign. Yeah.
I agree.
Hedwig and the Angry Inch, a show that I've always liked, but my personal take on it, I saw it the other night, is that it's been kind of glammed up for Broadway.
course
And
it
the
has.
emotional impact that
It's
it
the
had
only
down at
way
the
they
Jane-
could have done it, though, and
I
I
know, but
think
it
given
loses-
that they did that, they did it as well as they could. Peter agrees with you.
Yeah, what's your take on it?
Well, I love Neil Patrick Harris. I mean, he brings that, and you can feel that, and it's great for John Cameron Mitchell and Stephen Trask to have their work on Broadway.
I agree.
But he's a winner playing a loser,
Yes.
and it doesn't quite connect. When he opened that door to look
gal.
out at, at Tommy Nosis's, you felt like he was looking at himself.
Yeah, he looks at the audience and they're cheering for Neil
Right.
Patrick Harris.
Didn't
No, the
quite-
takeaway from that show is great score, great band.
Yeah,
And the
it is a
woman
great
is
score.
wonderful. What's her
She's
name?
good.
Lena?
She's
I was going to ask you guys, can
Lena
you
Hall,
think,
sorry.
Can you think of, we got to wrap it up, but I was curious about this because I was listening to that score, which I hadn't heard in a long time. How many scores, Terry, are there that are truly rock scores that work as musical theater scores at the same time?
Two, that one and Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
They're the only original scores for a rock show that for a musical I've ever seen that are real rock that works theatrically.
What about Here Lies Love?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, all right.
And
'cause
you,
I think
Ben,
that's-
what are your...
I would say Here Lies Love,
Yes.
too.
You would, yeah.
Hedwig, I found I was like, sort of humming the songs as I was walking down the street. It is infectious in that way. And I acknowledge your reservations about Neil Patrick Harris, but for me, to watch, it was a Hugh Jackman performance.
Yes.
He had the audience in his hand the way Hugh Jackman can do. And that has its own powers of exhilaration.
And Peter, how about Rent? Does Rent
I was going to
qualify
say, if you
as a
stretch,
rock?
I think if you stretch the definition a little tiny bit, I'd say Rent definitely belongs in that category.
Here, when you go back to it, isn't really a rock score.
No,
it's
it
almost,
isn't.
like a
It's kind of
vaudeville
dear, it's
score.
so
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
rock.
I
yeah,
actually
yeah.
think Andrew and Tim's Jesus Christ Superstar in 1970 was a new sound for the Broadway music.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, then you
Spring
gotta-
Awakening, parts of it I would
Oh,
say.
that's true, too, yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
Complaint Rock.
got to wrap it up. But if people, since we're syndicated around the country, if they're coming to town for a long weekend here in New York, Peter, the one show you think they should see?
In New York,
Yeah, if people coming into New York, yeah.
definitely Here Lies Love.
Here lies El Mel DeMarco.
Well, if they want to stand up and be pushed around, I mean, you have to have certain caveats. I mean,
Back
a lot of
at the
people
public.
You
don't-
can sit in the balcony.
little balcony
Because if
where I
Same
you can
thing.
say, yeah, no. Here's Lies Love.
a cripple of Inishman.
Cripple of Ishman. Terry?
You know, I'd send them to Raisin if they can get in. That is such a good, solid piece of work.
And may I add, Sashmo at the Waldorf
Thank you, dear.
by Terry. A wonderful performance of Louis Armstrong by John Douglas.
Yeah, say what you will about the play. John is my flop insurance.
Absolutely. All right, there you have it. Recommendations from the best. Terry Teachout from the Wall Street Journal, Ben Brantley from the New York Times, and Peter Marks from the Washington Post. Thanks for being our guest tonight on Theater Talk.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, plus public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency, and the Theater Development Fund's Technical Accessibility Program, which helps provide closed captioning.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.